In May 1941, Britain was shaken when the pride of the Royal Navy, the battleship HMS Hood, was sunk within minutes by Germany's steel monster, the Bismarck. The giant vessel vanished into the misty North Sea, leaving the Empire in despair. When every search failed, the last hope rested on a despised outcast, the PBY Catalina flying boat, slow and ungainly, yet it would go on to write one of the most dramatic chapters in World War II documentary history. To understand why an ugly airplane became a symbol, we must turn back the wheel of time to 1933. At the Consolidated Aircraft Factory in San Diego. There, amid the sound of hammers and the smell of machine oil, a young engineer named Isaac McLadden was sketching his dream, a type of flying boat that could fly far handle waves well and operate for hours on the water. Ladden did not seek speed, he sought endurance. In an era when everyone wanted to build the fastest thing, he chose to create the most durable one. And it was precisely that contrarian mindset that made a breakthrough. His design included a high parasol wing that made observation easy when flying over the sea, retractable landing gear so the airplane could land on both land and water, and most importantly, the wet wing, the first wing-integrated fuel tank in aviation history, which helped the Catalina fly farther than any contemporary aircraft. In 1935, the XP-3Y1 prototype took off for the first time, and it astonished the entire aviation world. The aircraft not only operated stably, but also set a continuous flight record of 3,443 miles, a number nearly implausible for 1930s technology. The US Navy immediately understood that they had in hand a tool capable of changing how people observed war at sea. From the XP-3Y1, a series of new versions appeared: PBY-1, PBY-2, then PBY-4, each version improved to be tougher, lighter, and with a wider field of view. When the first Catalinas were delivered to the Royal Air Force, the British gave it a familiar and proud name: Catalina, taken from the beautiful Santa Catalina Island off the coast of California. From a modest drawing in a small workshop, the Catalina began its journey to the skies and would become the eyes of thousands of people in the most tumultuous years of history. At dawn on May 26, 1941, the waves of the North Atlantic rolled as if to swallow everything. Amid thick fog, the Catalina of RAF No. 209 Squadron quietly took off from Lough Erne, Northern Ireland. Their mission was very clear and also very desperate: find the Bismarck. Pilot Dennis Briggs and navigator Leonard Shorty Walker sat silently in the cockpit. The drone of the engine blended with the wind. Only the fuel gauge needle drifted slowly. Then suddenly, between the gray cloud layers, a gigantic dark shape appeared below Bismarck. The Catalina immediately dove lower. Walker switched on the radio and sent the message in choking excitement: "Enemy in sight." From that signal, the entire British fleet changed course. The carrier Ark Royal launched its Swordfish squadrons, and the first torpedoes found their mark, disabling Bismarck's rudder. Not long after, the monster that had spread terror across Europe sank to the bottom of the sea. And the Catalina, the airplane once mocked, became a silent hero. It didn't fire, didn't drop bombs. It simply saw when no one else could. From that moment, Catalina stepped out of the shadow of doubt to become a symbol of patient eyes and an unfading trust. As the guns in the Atlantic temporarily fell silent, the flames of war burst anew in the Pacific. On the morning of December 7, 1941, under Hawaii's crystal-clear sky, Ensign William Tanner was flying a Catalina on patrol south of Oahu. At 6 a.m., the aircraft's radar detected a strange signal, apparently a submarine. Tanner immediately reported back to base. But then, just an hour later, the sky was ablaze. The first explosions thundered from the direction of Pearl Harbor. Bombs fell, black smoke rose, and the world entered a new era. In that chaos, 77 out of 81 Catalinas moored at Oahu were destroyed. The pilots stood helpless as their iron birds burned on the water. Yet war, in its cruel way, always finds a path to test the human spirit. Just a few days after the catastrophe, the surviving Catalinas were mobilized immediately. There was no room for fear. They took off in silence, carrying a new mission to reconnoiter, to search, and to guide the U.S. fleet across a vast Pacific never before brought under control. The Catalina was no longer merely an airplane. It became the eyes and ears of the entire fleet. From the first reconnaissance flights after Pearl Harbor, the Americans began to regain the initiative. Every reconnaissance photo, every radio signal from the Catalina was a precious piece of the puzzle, helping them reconstruct the Japanese fleet's movements. From the ashes of Pearl Harbor, the Catalina rose, not as a war machine, but as a witness to human resilience. That image later became one of the most moving symbols recreated in the most famous World War II documentary works about the Pacific. While the smoke over Hawaii had not yet cleared, the Catalina was thrust into a new trial. On December 27, 1941, just 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, 6 PBYs were assigned to attack Jolo Island, a base of the Japanese Navy in the Philippines. It was Catalina's first daytime bombing mission and a testament to the desperation of the early war period. The heavy, slow aircraft without fighter escort had to fly into enemy-crowded skies. As soon as they appeared, Japanese fighters swooped in. The air battle was brief but brutal. Most Catalinas were shot down or badly damaged. When the last one returned to base, its fuselage riddled with bullet holes, the pilots were nearly exhausted. But that sortie brought a life-or-death lesson. The Catalina was not an attack aircraft. It was born to sea, not to strike. It did not need to plunge into fire, but needed to fly higher, farther, and more patiently. After the failure at Jolo, the U.S. Navy adjusted its strategy. They realized that every victory at sea begins with information, and Catalina was precisely that source. It became the Pacific's divine eye, silently sweeping the sky and ocean, seeking traces of the Japanese fleet before the enemy could act. Like a quiet old soldier, the Catalina learned from failure, stood up after loss, and grew more mature after each sortie. From Jolo, it began the long journey toward greater feats, Ceylon, Midway, Guadalcanal, where the name Catalina would be engraved forever in the memories of those who lived through the war. After the lesson of Jolo, Catalina entered its true period of maturity. No longer a lone daredevil, it became the silent observer in every Allied campaign. And it was precisely that role that saved thousands of lives. On April 4, 1942, the sky over the Indian Ocean was tinged with twilight as Canadian pilot Leonard Burchell flew a Catalina of RAF number 413 Squadron on patrol near Ceylon. Suddenly, amid distant mist, he saw a massive dark formation moving as the Japanese fleet was approaching. Burchell immediately sent a warning before being shot down and taken prisoner. But that single message was enough to save the entire Eastern Fleet, allowing the British to evacuate in time. 2 months later in the Pacific, Catalina once again proved its worth. At dawn on June 3, 1942, during the Midway campaign, a PBY of Squadron VP-44 detected the Japanese fleet advancing toward the Midway atoll. Thanks to that, the United States proactively set up an ambush, leading to one of the war's most decisive victories. Not only did it detect the enemy, Catalina also recorded a rare feat in the Battle of Midway. A PBY struck a Japanese ship with a torpedo, the only American hit in the entire battle. This was not just a miracle, but proof that sometimes strength does not come from speed, but from endurance and precision. From the Indian Ocean to Midway, Catalina had become the wide-open eyes of the Pacific. And as the war shifted toward the Solomon Islands, those eyes would open again in the darkness, where the legend of the Black Cats was born. At the end of 1942, the Guadalcanal battlefield blazed. The Japanese deployed high-speed transport convoys called the fearsome Tokyo Express by the Americans, running at night to resupply the island. By day, Catalina was too slow to pursue, but when night fell, that very slowness became a deadly weapon. Squadron VP-12 decided to paint the entire aircraft matte black, remove all lights, leaving only a small white streak on the wing so pilots could recognize each other. They flew low, skimming the sea, silent as ghosts. The first sorties terrified the Japanese. No radar detected them. No warning lights flashed, only the low rumble of engines and sudden flashes of light in the night. From then on, the name Black Cats was born. They didn't just reconnoiter, they also attacked at night, dropping bombs, firing guns, then vanishing into the darkness as if they had never been there. Catalina, once dismissed as a slow-flying pig, now became the ocean's ghost sowing fear in the enemy's heart. The Black Cat's missions not only brought victories, but also affirmed a simple truth: a tool that seems weak can become perfect if used the right way. And after Guadalcanal, as the front lines spread across the ocean, Catalina began to take on more roles than ever, ranging from hunting submarines to rescue support and even psychological warfare. As the war widened, Catalina appeared everywhere: the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the South Pacific, the Indian Ocean. Wherever there were waves, there was a Catalina. The Royal Air Force RAF used Catalinas to hunt German submarines and the U-boats that had haunted every convoy. Each mission lasted for dozens of hours. Under gray skies and silver waves, pilots had to grip the yoke tightly to hold their heading. Whenever a surfaced U-boat was spotted, the Catalina would dive drop depth charges, then climb away to evade anti-aircraft fire. Gradually, more than 40 German submarines were destroyed under Catalina's wings. Not only Britain, Brazil also achieved a resounding feat. On July 31, 1943, a Brazilian Air Force Catalina discovered and sank U-1999 off Rio de Janeiro, a symbolic victory for all of South America in the fight against fascism. In the Pacific, Australian pilots used Catalinas in an astonishingly creative way. They dropped dummy bombs, beer bottles fitted with blades, to create a terrifying whistling sound at night, making the Japanese think they were under attack by new weapons. That was psychological warfare in the truest sense, when fear was used like ammunition. Catalina had gone beyond the limits of a reconnaissance aircraft. It didn't just see the enemy, it made the enemy feel its presence, whether in the dark or amid the vast misty ocean. And that very courage opened the way to a nobler role, saving lives amid war. In the inferno of war, Catalina was not merely a combat tool, it was an angel of hope. When pilots were shot down, when sailors drifted across the ocean, they always prayed to hear the distant sound of Catalina's engines. In 1944, U.S. Navy Lieutenant Nathan Gordon flew a Catalina into ferocious gunfire to rescue 15 pilots trapped in Cavite Bay. The waves were high, bullets hissed around the fuselage, yet he remained resolute. For that action, Gordon received the Medal of Honor, the highest award of the United States. That same year in the Atlantic, 2 RAF pilots, John Cruikshank and David Hornell, piloted Catalinas to attack German submarines, hitting their targets, but having their aircraft riddled with fire. They still managed to fly for a few more minutes so the crew could escape. Both sacrificed their lives, but their exploits became symbols of human courage. In 1945, when the USS Indianapolis was sunk after completing its mission of transporting the atomic bomb to Tinian, hundreds of sailors were left behind at sea. In that vast hellscape, Lieutenant Adrian Marks flew a Catalina that found them. With no room left inside the fuselage, he tied 56 survivors onto the aircraft's wings and waited for ships to arrive. In their eyes, Catalina was not merely an airplane, it was a miracle in the blue inferno. These rescue stories spread around the world, making people understand that Catalina did not fight only with steel, but with the human heart. And as the war drew to an end, that heart continued to beat in missions of peace. When the guns of World War II fell silent, many thought Catalinas would sit in museums. But no, they kept flying, only now bearing a different mission. Australia's Qantas airline used Catalinas on the world's longest route, at the time the Perth-Ceylon run, lasting more than 32 hours, nicknamed the Double Sunrise, because passengers saw the sun rise twice on the same journey. Catalinas also appeared in civilian life. Jacques Cousteau, the famous ocean explorer, used a Catalina as a platform to observe the sea and film the documentary series Calypso. Various versions were used by royalty explorers and film studios, bringing the image of the flying boat into popular culture. Well into the late 20th century, hundreds of Catalinas kept flying, this time not amid bombs, but amid wildfire smoke. Converted into water bombers, they hurled themselves into forest fires in Canada, the United States, and Europe, fighting fire rather than people. And as aviation technology entered the jet age, Catalinas still endured as a reminder that some machines are born not to race, but to serve, protect, and endure alongside humanity. From those civilian flights, the Catalina legend closed its wartime chapter and opened a new one, the chapter of memory and legacy. Over the course of its service, more than 380 Catalinas were built enough to make it the most common flying boat in history. It was not fast, not flashy, not fitted with big guns, yet it lasted longer, flew farther, and proved more valuable than any of its contemporaries. Catalina took part in every theater, from the frigid Atlantic to the blazing Pacific, hunting submarines, rescuing survivors, conducting reconnaissance, and carrying out post-war missions. It was not just a means of war, but a mirror reflecting the qualities of humanity in the darkest of times: resilience, endurance, and a refusal to give up. Catalina was never the most beautiful airplane, nor the fastest, but it was the most reliable aircraft of the 20th century, a symbol of courage, endurance, and the human spirit in the most harrowing years of war. From Bismarck to Midway, From Guadalcanal to peaceful skies, Catalina lived, fought, and saved lives. Though more than 8 decades have passed, whenever its name is spoken, people still feel the breath of the sea, the engine's roar in the fog, and the heartbeat of those who dared to fly beyond fear. Catalina is not just an airplane. It is a reminder that persistence can create miracles, and that sometimes the ugliest one is the greatest hero of its age.